you want me to record from here for you?
I got it. Thank you. That was nice. Who was here last time? Oh, that's nice if you guys came back. Thank you. So, Patterns of Persuasion is a presentation that I created years ago after doing research. And the reason Chris has helped me out is doing some handouts for me. So, if you guys want to take notes, you can. If you want the slides, just leave me your business card afterwards, and then I'll make sure to get them to you. So I created this. My parents divorced when I was 6, and it was like really conflictual. The custody battle went on for 9-10 years, and it was really interesting because we had joint custody, my brother and I. And when I was with my mom would be like, "Oh, how'd it go with your dad?" And then I would say something stupid, and then that would end up in the court case. And then I would go with my dad, and my dad would be like, "Oh, how'd it go with your mom?" Again, I would say something stupid. And so I found myself as a kid, like, I just need to completely shut up. But I got really, really good at reading the situation and the dynamic. It was almost like a survival mechanism for me to be able to cope. And so when I started actually studying how you can pinpoint it, it was fascinating for me because there was almost things that I intuitively knew, but I couldn't pinpoint it, and now I can actually pinpoint it. And I've actually done a lot of research recently. I'm really a big geek. I have a master's degree in psychology, and I'm doing my doctorate in human behavior. And on the side, I just thought I would study neuroscience because I'm fascinated with the brain. But yeah, I am like total geek. And but in terms of my business, I'm actually a coach. I help people deal with people in the workplace. This information is going to be relevant in understanding your colleagues and helping you close sales. Even your family dynamics, all of that is completely relevant. So what I noticed, though, in studying neuroscience is our bodies are actually hardwired to pick up on whether or not somebody is a friend or a foe, so we can determine whether or not there's a threat. So there's a lot that we're not aware of that our body is actually processing. So what's really cool about this is you get to be able to pinpoint everything. Sound good? So I'm going to talk about all the different elements of pattern of persuasion. Can you see that okay? You want me to dim one of the lights?
You can see it.
The spot? You're good?
See feet, lips, and fists.
With some additional accents, which is cool. So let me talk a little bit about persuasion. What do you guys think the difference is between persuasion and coercion?
Coercion is force.
Yeah, and persuasion?
Coached.
Cajole is
Coached.
collaborative.
It's collaborative?
You just
So-
don't know about the force.
Exactly. That's the difference. All right, sorry that I should have checked this, guys. I'm going to put a clicker because I'm going to mess this up. So here's how I define the difference between coercion and persuasion. In both instances, you're trying to get somebody to do what you want them to do. In one instance, they're happy they did it. And in another instance, they're not happy they did it. And they might do it because they feel obligated or they feel like they have to. But if you look in terms of the importance of persuasion, if somebody is secretly resentful, it's going to completely backfire. And the reason I bring that up, because once you can read body language, it actually gives you incredible insight. And I don't teach this so that you can go and manipulate people and be coercive and get what you want. I teach this so that we can strengthen our connections and strengthen our relationships with people. So I'm going to give you a word of caution. If you use this information for evil, people know. Like, they'll pick up on it, and it's actually going to backfire. So nobody here is going to do that, right? Honest? Do you know why you raise your hand?
Because you did. You coerced us.
When you show the palm of your hand, it indicates trust. So one of the easiest ways to generate trust is to make sure that your hands are on the table, palms up. There's a lot of information in terms of hands. Let me give you a couple. Tidbits in terms of reading body language. What people do is they understand one component, and then they think that they can understand the message. It's really not that simple. So if somebody is standing there with their arms crossed, that does not mean necessarily that they're guarded. It may mean any number of things. If you look at guys, depending on their frame, a lot of them will It may be that somebody's actually cold. It may be that they're completely relaxed, right? Same thing with how somebody has their legs crossed. So there's a couple things we need to look at before we can kind of assess what somebody's body language is actually doing. The body is constantly communicating. So one of the things that people think is, I'm really good at hiding my emotions. Not necessarily, because even if you're hiding it and you're trying to contain yourself, you're still speaking. It's still saying something. Secondly, look for cues of congruence. Do you guys know what that means? Congruence means that things should line up. So if I have my arms crossed, let's say it's a dude, he's got his arms crossed, and he's sitting in a chair and he's got his legs kind of spread. That's incongruent, right? Because if somebody was really guarded, the legs would be crossed and the arms would be crossed. So sometimes we want to look for when things are actually out of alignment. That can indicate some level of deception, or it gives us a cue that maybe we're interpreting it incorrectly. Thirdly, consider the context. Again, if it's really cold in the room and somebody's got their arms crossed, it could be because they're cold. Study micro-expressions. This is the most fascinating thing of all. Micro-expressions, we give away our emotions, how we're feeling about something, in a split second. And you'll notice with kids, like they're taught, like, oh, don't make that face, or that's rude, stop doing that. So we learn as we grow up to hide our facial expressions. But the facial expressions occur very quickly, and then we hide them. So if you're trained on how to look for them, you can spot them very quickly. One of my absolute favorite things to do is to watch crime drama shows, particularly when they get interrogated. You can tell by somebody's voice, you can tell by their tone, what their posture is to get a total read on everything. It's really interesting. And so if you spot the micro expressions, it gives you a wealth of information. The sad part is when they look at all of the interesting professions like police officers, psychologists, judges, they're actually no better at reading micro expressions than the general population. General population gets it right 50% of the time. But 50. But if you're trained, and I did one of the courses, it becomes very easy. So I like those ones where like there's a new news broadcast, somebody stole my baby. And you're like, oh, I wonder if it's the mom. You can read like the TV is just much more fascinating. Look for clusters, meaning there's a lot of information coming from different sources of the body. That gives you more credibility in terms of what you're looking at. And then leakage signs. Leakage signs are when people are trying to hide something, but they give away a tell. Does anybody ever play poker? So this is very, very handy for poker. That's what you look for, right? You look for those tell because people think they're hiding it. But I'm going to give you clues to different parts of the body that are far more reliable than you actually think. So you ready?
Yes.
These are all fascinating.
All right, already, right? Have you all heard about the statistics that when you communicate with somebody, what percentage of the message has to do with the words you use? Out of 100%, it's only 7%. 38% is tone, and then 55% is body language. That in and of itself explains why there's so much conflict over text. Because out of text, you totally strip tone and body language. And that's, of course, why people end up using emoticons, because they're trying to communicate that other piece to it, right, so that they understand. And tone is really, really important. People oftentimes don't realize the importance of it. I'm going to play a little game for you. We're going to say the word okay. So when I say go, I want everybody to say okay as if you're super excited. Ready? Go.
Okay.
Okay. Now say excited like you're being nagged.
Okay.
Now say as if you're being hostile.
Okay.
Okay, damn it.
Now say it if you're being affectionate.
Okay.
I always do that just on the end of it. So same word, right? And yet look at all of the different meanings that one word has only because of tone. Now if you were paying close attention, you'd actually notice that your tone altered your body language as well. So when you were surprised, your body acted differently than when you were hostile. So a lot of times when you can look at tone and body language, that gives you 93% of the message. When somebody says one thing and then their body says something else, which do you think people trust? Body, always. They may not realize that, but we know that that's more honest than the words that people use. So what actions do speak louder than words. When we look at what's below the surface, when we meet somebody on the outside, we see things like facial expressions, tone, body language, the words they choose. Those are all indicators for what's going on underneath. Underneath, you've got things like motives, values, their experiences, their beliefs, all of that. So I was just meeting with a client today, and she's hosting Easter dinner with her family, and her sister is irritating her. She's really angry at her sister. And so she grew up, 3 sisters, and the one sister that's irritating her was the oldest sister. The oldest sister always left and did her own thing. And so she feels like the older sister just kind of abandons the family all the time. And I said, what do you think the perception is of the sister? Like, what's going on in her world? Well, every time she invites her to something, she either cancels or she kind of hedges. And then if they do agree to something, she kind of backs out. And so on the surface, those are the words, that's the body language that she sees. So she interprets that as she's a liar, she's not being truthful. And I said, what if her experience was that she never felt she belonged? Like she was always rejected. And my client goes, that's what she says all the time. And I was like, I've never met her, I've never spoken to her, how would I possibly know? That's because when you can look below the surface, and you'll see that people's actions and people's intentions reveal something much deeper. And oftentimes it's not what we see on the surface. It has a much bigger meaning. That was like a
Sorry.
So in terms of persuasion, I'm going to talk to you about 4 components. This is a mini version of a full program. The full program is like 2 hours. So we're going to talk about how to connect with people. When you meet with somebody and you want to persuade them, there's always a moment, especially in sales, where sometimes they're completely resistant, and then they get to the point where they might actually consider it. That's a really good part in the dynamic, because you want to connect, like build rapport. Then you want them to consider it. You want them to be committed to it. And then at the end, you want them to have conviction that they're happy they did it. So those are basically the 4 components of persuasion. And I'm going to talk a little bit about body language in each of those components. First impressions. How long does it take to make a first impression? So it's not even seconds. It's 1/10 of a second. Yep. When our brain actually determines whether or not we think somebody is friendly or whether somebody is a potential enemy, it's done in a split second. We're not even aware of it. What might happen, though, is we'll get a weird feeling about them. We can spot a smile more than any other facial expression or body language the farthest. Because for survival reasons, we're wired to be able to determine whether or not somebody would hurt us or not. So there's certain cues that we can pick up on that we're not even aware of. And we assess in 1/10 of a second whether or not we think that person is attractive, whether we think that person is trustworthy, and whether we think that person is credible. Now, what happens once you form an impression and you're trying to get somebody to change that? It is, right? Because mentally, once you've committed to that impression, it's very hard to undo. It's possible, but it certainly is hard to undo. So one of the things you want to ask yourself in terms of how you're dealing with people in your sales type situations is, are you likable? What does likable mean?
Being friendly.
What?
Easy to talk to, being friendly.
Yeah?
Easy to talk to.
How do you know when somebody's not likable?
I feel comfortable.
You feel comfortable, right? So if I meet somebody and I feel that they're kind of pushy and over the top, that actually activates a threat response, right? I perceive that person as threatening. Instantly, I'll not like them because I'll perceive them as a threat. We know that if we find something in common with people, there's a natural affinity. So in addition to identifying whether or not we identify people as friend or foe, we also identify them as in-group or out-group. In-group is you're like me, out-group is you're not like me. And in a split second, we decide that. So if we have a connection with somebody, even if it's meaningless, like like you visited the same city when you were like kids, it means nothing. You'll actually start enjoying that person more, you'll like that person more. And the most interesting thing is, likability attracts likability. So if you like somebody, they'll end up liking you more. It just goes back and forth. Part of that has to do with the energy and the chemistry that we give off of. So you want to actually think for yourself in what you're doing in your professional careers, whether or not people describe you as somebody who's likable. Because you could do everything right, but if you're not perceived as likable, you're dead in the water. There's nothing that you can do. That first impression and then that likability factor are the two things that you need. So I'll talk a little bit about how we get there. And this is all about recognizing how you're actually perceived by other people. How would you know, by the way? Because people aren't going to say, you're not a really likable person, right? Or you're perceived as pretty arrogant. Maybe you might hear that once in a while if you really are like super arrogant. But how would you know how other people perceive you?
Facial expressions.
Yeah. Anything else?
Dismiss.
Dismiss?
Dismiss.
Dismissive, right? They don't want to spend time with you. Yeah. So our ability to read body language is not to it's not just to understand them, it's actually to gain perspective on ourselves, right? How we're impacting other people. One of the things I just heard that's really interesting, I don't know if I'm having a hot flash or I'm just talking about my hair.
No, it's hot here.
It's hot. It comes in waves, so I don't know.
You're all back right.
What was I saying?
Hot flash.
Oh, leadership. See, that's good. So most of the time, leaders don't quite realize how influential they are. Consider this. If you have a boss, everybody that works for that boss is evaluating whether or not that boss is a threat at any given moment. So they're very attuned to what's going on with the boss. And so the boss's emotions are highly contagious. The boss is in a bad mood, most people are going to end up having a bad day. What I learned, and I hadn't considered before, is as you go up in the ranks, your ability to read other people gets worse.
Right.
And that's because your survival isn't dependent on reading people. You've got the power. So you stop using that ability. And then we've got a lot of biases, and so we end up seeing things the way we want to see them and not realizing that we've lost touch. You've all seen leaders like that, right? Like what they think is going on is not actually what's going on.
Yeah.
That never happens. All right, I'm going to skip that. When I hide my language, my body utters. So there was a psychologist by the name of Paul Ekman. Did you ever watch that show, Lie to Me? He was a consultant on that. I don't know why the show went away. I think he consults a little bit now on Bold every once in a while. He was a psychologist, and he worked with very severely depressed patients. And he had to assess whether or not, if they were given privileges to go home off the weekend, if they would end up harming themselves, or whether or not they were healthy enough to go home. So he was working with this one woman, and he gave her privileges to go home over the weekend. And she came back on the Monday, and she confessed that she had an entire game plan to take her life. And he used to record the sessions. And so that's a big fear of any psychologist. I never wanted to have that would just suck. So he went back through all of the videos to see if he could spot micro-expressions, if there was some clue that would have given him an indication of what she was really going to do. And as a result of that research, he identified with there's 7 primary emotions. I don't know that you can all see this now, but on the top left, that's actually anger. In the middle, sometimes people confuse fear with surprise, but that's actually fear. The top right is disgust. The easiest way to tell disgust is the nose crinkles. It's like a dirty diaper. It happens in a split second. Watching political debates, fascinating. The bottom left is surprise. The middle is happy or joy. And then the right bottom is grief. So I'm going to go through these a little bit more in detail. This is the 7th one. Does anybody know what the 7th emotion is?
Oh, really?
Contempt. And what you see with contempt, it happens in a split second. but people will move the side of their mouth like ever so quickly with utter disdain. And it like split second. And they don't have no idea that they're doing it. I worked with a client, I was helping him in hiring people, but I hadn't sat in on the interviews. He did the interviews and then we were debriefing. And he had two candidates, similar experience. One had slightly better experience. And so he was describing them. The one that had more experience was a female, the other one was a male. Every time he talked about the female, he scrunched his nose. And I was like, maybe it's just itchy, I don't know. But then when he said her name again, he did it again. And so I said, is there something about her? Because I didn't know if I was reading that or not. And he goes, I can't put my finger on it. He goes, I don't know what it is, but she just irritates me. And he felt like he should hire her because she had slightly better qualifications. Of course, I was like, don't. It's like you're already demonstrating disgust, not going to be good as an employee. So he ended up hiring the other guy, but he was aware that there was something, but he wasn't listening to himself, right? He was like dismissing it. So, and it gave it away just with that nose. So let's play a game. I wish you could see these slides, they're really cute.
Why don't we lower the lights here?
Do you guys know? Lower the light. Oh, is it all on one? All right, so first one we're going to do, so you guys are going to make facial expressions because I want you to practice what they actually feel like, okay? So the first one I want you guys to do is I want you to be really angry. Go ahead and make an angry face. That's anger, right? When you made an angry face, what did you notice? Right. Piercing eyes. Eyebrows actually dart down, right? And then teeth. If you go up to a dog and you see the dog's bottom teeth, leave. Here's what's interesting. Here's a lion. Identical anger, right? It looks the same.
It's Michelle.
No.
All I have to do is spell stuff you.
What's this one?
Surprise.
So let's everybody do surprise. Tell me what that one feels like. What do you notice? Actually, that's not surprise. That is fear. People confuse that one.
Gazelle. The last one's a lion, that's a gazelle, right?
Yeah. Yeah, right? He's coming. The difference between surprise and fear is when people are surprised, especially if they're pleasantly surprised, everything lifts. You end up defying gravity whenever there's happy emotions. So the eyebrows actually arc, the eyes get really wide, and then the mouth opens. What's slightly different with fear is it doesn't arc up, it actually pulls back in a frozen state. So the eyes get wide, but if you notice the eyebrows are straight pulled back. And then same with the mouth. It's a very frozen position. This one is?
Disgust.
Disgust is the easiest one. Go ahead and make disgust. That one is? That's surprise. You see the difference with the eyebrows? Yeah. And this one? So, do you ever wonder whether or not somebody's like really sad or they're just pretending and it's like crocodile tears? Are they really a sociopath or do they actually have remorse? There's one dead giveaway every time, is the eyebrows. It's hard to do. If you think of a situation right now that actually makes you sad, to actually feel grief, it's not even sad, it's like, it's stronger, it's grief. Your eyebrows will actually point up. And it's hard to mimic, so unless you're feeling it, you can't do it. So when you watch people that are talking about like, I don't know what happened to my wife, maybe she's missing. There's like real grief. I told you I wasn't.
That doesn't happen.
That just helps me keep keep my skills, like, how can we keep
Takes
practicing?
the eyebrows up.
So that's the difference between crocodile tears and the other thing is we're wired to be able to feel what somebody else feels. We have what are called mirror neurons in our brain. And so we mimic what somebody else actually feels. So when you look at that little boy, it's like, oh, that's how you know it's genuine because it actually impacts you. The other one, there's no response. So one of the ways you can tell whether or not somebody is being genuine or sincere is actually listening to yourself. Does it actually evoke a response in yourself? Smiling. So there's genuine smiling and then there's fake smiling. So that response tells you it's genuine, right? That baby wasn't posed to be able to make that smile. So one of the things that you can tell in terms of a genuine smile is actually crow's feet. Which has nothing to do with Botox and age. It happens at any age, where the sides actually wrinkle. When it's a fake smile, people just move their lips, but their eyes don't actually cringe down. And then if their eyes are open, when somebody really is happy, there literally is a twinge. There's a sparkle. And part of that is because of all the chemicals that are being released. So it actually alters it. These are called blockers. If you're talking to somebody, if you're talking to a client, shut up, number one. Because that's somebody basically saying, I can't take any more information. And people will do it in various ways. If you remember it in terms of like monkey see, monkey do, if somebody's blocking their ears, they're probably an auditory learner and they don't want to hear any more information. If they're blocking their eyes, it's like visually they can't take in any more information. So anytime you see somebody block either their mouth, their eyes, their ears, or their entire face, they're trying to process and there's too much information and you need to back off. This is a very good sign. For those of you who like to talk a lot about what it is that you do and you like to get into the details of it, it's like me talking to somebody who does insurance. Brian doesn't do this, by the way. But if you've ever talked to somebody, an insurance agent, was talking to somebody about insurance coverage for my HOA. And I was like, I have to bring this back to them, so could you simplify it for me? And he was like, oh. And then he just started talking faster, and then kind of like I was stupid. And then we were in the middle of a meeting, and I saw myself do this, and I was like, now is not the time, like I can't take it in. And I was literally like shielding myself, like stop! It was just, yeah, too much info. This one, what's this one mean? Yeah. So really interesting. Anytime your hands are by your face like this, you're thinking. Now, if you're in a sales presentation, you see this is not a bad thing. They're actually at that considering stage, right? But there's a slight, you don't even know you're doing it. There's a slight difference between the finger being underneath the chin and the finger covering the mouth. Very slight. When it covers the mouth, that's usually somebody that wants to say something and they're refraining. Whereas if it's this, they're just thinking. And so a lot of times you'll see people that start doing this or they purse their lips. Pursed lips mean like where you're biting inward. That's somebody who's dying to say something and they're trying to hold it back really bad. Highly insecure. You wouldn't think the gentleman on the left, he looks like he's pretty confident, right? He looks what? He's blocked. It's not only that he's blocked, because if you're comfortable, you'll make the 4, right? And sit like that. But the knee is actually higher, which is what indicates it's a block. In addition to that, he's got both his hands over it. Is that 5 minutes?
No, that's not what I was saying.
I'm like, okay.
Right,
Yeah,
I'm blocking everybody.
yeah. But his hands are literally gripping it. His hands aren't relaxed. So even though he's smiling, he's not confident at all. Biting your lip. I don't know if you guys saw the image on the title page, but there's a difference between biting your lip out of insecurity and then biting your lip out of being seductive. And it literally is like a centimeter. And it means something totally different. Obviously, when somebody becomes a turtle, and they hunch down. They lower their posture. And then there's what are called pacifying gestures, biting your nails. Sometimes people primp themselves, you know. They try to, the guys may fix their cufflinks, that kind of thing. That's usually trying to gain some confidence. Broken zipper, or affectionately known as protecting the jewels. The most insecure stance that you can identify. And this one you guys will remember. You'll see this all the time. And again, if you looked at the entire posture, you wouldn't get how insecure that actually is. And men and women will do it. I was on part of a training team one time, and we had done a large conference. And this was actually for B&I. And at the end of the conference, he went to give everybody feedback, right? And so everybody kind of came in like a half view. And I looked, and everybody went like this right away to get the feedback. Nobody knew they were doing it, and I was like, holy cow. Yeah, most people don't like
I
feedback.
would have thought that would have been like a sign of respect, like at a funeral or something.
I agree.
Well, so there's a difference between the most confident posture that you can have, and it's quite awkward. If you guys want to stand up, I'll show you. If your feet are like shoulder width apart and your hands are to the side, this is the most confident posture you can have. And it's awkward because most people lean or they do something with their hands. So if you go and you put your hands now in front of you, it doesn't feel confident at all.
It makes me feel secure.
Well, because it's protected.
I'm not covering the jewels anymore.
And when I was
Relates to
listening
the
at, and
jewels.
maybe any of these guys would tell you, when I just introduced myself to any of these guys, when I was paying attention to them, I would hold my wrist because I was so concerned about what they were talking about. And to me, that's just kind of more like, it's better than just, what am I going to do with my hands now? Like, you know,
And so why does this feel uncomfortable? You're exposed.
True story.
And it's not just like below the waist. It's, if you look at our jugular, anytime we want to demonstrate trust, we expose our torso. And so you do feel comfortable doing that because you've got some protection, you're guarded somewhat. And this, you're completely exposed. And this is why this is more confident.
Wow.
Go ahead and have a seat.
Wow.
Now there's the question of hands behind the back. So if you're in England, they'll have hands behind their back like this because it's very proper. And it doesn't mean insecurity at all. But the minute the hand comes up on the elbow and they tighten the grip, then that's high insecurity.
But if it's not, you just hold your hands behind you, that's
Yeah.
just secure.
This is just kind of comfortable.
It's closer to your gun.
I have lots of protection in that. Oh, so I was talking about the hands, right? So the hands communicate a wealth of information. I mean, if you think about when you're first introduced to a dog, and if you go to touch a dog, palm down, what will happen? One of two. The dog will either cower or be prepared to fight. So if you're smart, you actually put your palm up. Now, how on earth does a dog know that palm up means they can trust you? But that's what happens. You put your palm down.
They give you the high five.
Yeah, but even if the dog's never been hit, we're wired to know that. Like, there's more sensors connecting to the hand to the brain than any other part of the body. And so when people are talking, there was a woman that used to talk. She was a little petite woman and she had very long nails. And she would talk and she would constantly make these striking gestures. She would do one of these and all the time. And her likability factor was kind of low. And I remember thinking, if she literally just changed what she did with her hands, she wouldn't be seen as so aggressive. And I think she adopted that because she was so petite, so she was trying to get people's attention. And then it just like escalated and became very aggressive. And if you watch politicians when they speak, I'll go through some of those. That's very meaningful what they end up doing with their hands. So when somebody is going to be dominant and they're talking to you like this, the palms are always down. when they're genuine and trusting, their palms are always going to be up. And it's a very slight thing. Sometimes it's neutral, which just means, it's comfortable. But you can always tell whether somebody likes to have, you can tell in a relationship when people are holding hands who's the one that has control. Because it's the one that has the dominant hand down and the other person is holding up. Not 100%, sometimes it depends on size, but generally. So here's, Hillary Clinton was, this was not when she ran the last time, it was prior to that, years and years ago. Although her likability factor in either race wasn't terribly high. But one of the things that was identified was she had what was called the double barrel point. And that's so aggressive. And if you look at Obama, that's called the politician's point. And if you ever watch politicians in the race, in the beginning in the debates, where they get really frustrated, their hand gestures are aggressive. And then after they've been in office for a while, all of a sudden it becomes very polished and they're coached on how to do that. And you can tell when somebody's been coached because when you truly talking with your hand gestures actually occur a split second before you speak. And if it's contrived, it happens a split second after. What's this one? Yeah? This guy over here, when they point to their junk, that's a sexual innuendo. Guys will either put their hands in their pocket and have their thumbs out, or they'll tuck their thumbs in and literally splay. Look at me.
Why do you gotta call it junk?
Yeah, I call it junk. Anytime you see this guy, even though he's got his arms crossed, but you can see his thumb. Anytime you see thumbs, it's confidence. So this is called the Superman stance. This is the most confident stance that you can have. The women try to overcompensate, which comes off actually as kind of arrogant. And if you see a guy that stands like that, very, very arrogant. I stand like that because it's comfortable for me, but I understand how it's perceived sometimes, so I really try not to do that. So these are over-the-top arrogant. So legs. So now you can tell a little bit with hands, right? Whether or not somebody's being genuine, whether or not you can trust them. The legs actually give away so much information. When you look at this picture, do you think that there's anybody that knows each other?
Yes.
Who?
Two on the other.
It looks like it, right?
The guy on the right, they're interested.
Yeah, so they may not know each other, but they're certainly attracted to
If
each
she
other.
was hanging her shoe, I'd go with the
For sure. I don't have it in this slide, but I have one. If a woman dangles a shoe, she's ready. Yeah, totally. For real. So our legs and our feet point in the direction that we're interested. So the fact that they're slightly close,
And they're leaning.
I was just going to say, yeah, and he's leaning. But whereas these, she's actually leaning away and her torso slightly out, right? So just by somebody sitting kind of gives you an indication of what's going on. That's close. That wasn't the actual one with the foot hanging out. So what do you think's going on in this situation?
Reaching for him.
Huh?
Reaching for him. Flirting for him.
Yeah, so she likes him.
Not so much.
Not at all. He not only is crossed away from her, his foot is turned in the other direction. I see this a lot in networking events. They're interesting for me for a whole other reason. So sometimes we want to be polite and we talk to somebody, right? But our feet will always point in the direction that we want to go. And it's if we're wanting to leave, unconsciously we'll point towards the door. Our feet will. So every once in a while I'll see somebody whose likability factor maybe is a little lower, and they're talking to somebody, and that person, let's say they're in the middle here, right? And their feet are pointed towards the door, like they can't wait to go. but their body is like this because they're trying to be respectful and nice. But the bottom half is like, get me out of here. And the person that they're talking to has no idea because this person is just trying to be polite. And so if you look at somebody's feet, you'll always be able to tell what they're really thinking. Hard to do in poker. But if you can see how people shift their posture a little based off of how they sit, you can tell what's going on with their feet. And then we defy gravity when we're happy. So when we're happy, we kind of flip our toes, like our feet a little bit. We bounce our leg. Not in terms of, sometimes people are just kind of jittery, but if we're happy, there's like a bounce. So somebody might have like a total stoic face at the poker table, and they have no idea that their foot is like, and you'll actually see the movement in the shoulder. Because it's not, you can't go under the table. Hang there. So whenever we're happy, our foot goes up. Oh, I was going to say, if a girl kisses a guy and that happens, she really, really, really likes him. Because anytime you're defying gravity, it's happy. And so that's an exacerbated movement of this. But that toe up, happy. Called happy feet. Deception. Do you know why they say that you can tell somebody's lying if they scratch their nose? Same premise of polygraph test, which again isn't going to work on a sociopath. But generally speaking, when you lie, the capillaries in your body, and particularly in your nose, expand because you need more oxygen because you're now nervous. And that expansion actually makes your nose itchy. So again, they might just have an itchy nose. But if you say something and you see somebody scratch their nose, usually if it's like a scratch, like really quick, like a scratch, it's a scratch. And if it's deception, it's like it lingers a little bit or it's very like fleeting. It's either one extreme. Anytime you're talking to somebody and you see these while they're talking, they cover their eyes, they cover their mouth a little, it's like they're talking out of the side of their mouth. Total lie. Not always, but it is an indication of deception. What it could be is, it might not be that what they're saying is a lie. It might be that there's more information they're choosing not to share. So what they're saying is true, but there's another piece that they're not sharing it, so that shows up as deception. Okay, let's play a game. We leave right on time. What's going on? Let's start with this guy over here. What's he thinking? Okay, so let's break it down. How do you know he's interested in her?
Foot. Well, he's looking.
Yeah, the foot is pointed.
And he's
All here, yeah. His face and his shoulders, right? What does she think?
Much chunk in the trunk.
Her feet are straight. He likes her too, right?
Yeah.
But her feet are straight.
He's perturbed the other guy.
Totally pissed, right? Because that eyebrow right
One
there.
wife's her husband, one less boyfriend.
She's being polite, but she's got her arms crossed. She's not pointing in any direction. She's certainly not giving off any flirtation signals, so she's neutral. This guy knows that he likes her too. So yeah, he's jealous.
Competition.
Yeah.
She's saying I'm really not screwing her.
I'm really not sure. And that's that. So that's how you can read it. I like going to the airport because it's best people watching ever. That's it, you guys. Thanks so much for your time. This is a self-set of 2 hours. Are you doing a whole
Yeah. Before you guys go, 2 quick things. One, if you haven't bought a raffle ticket yet and you would like to, you have a moment to buy a raffle ticket. Otherwise, we're doing the raffle in just a minute. And also, Pelican has provided us with some swag bags over here as well. So pick one of those up on the way out. Anybody else want to give me raffle tickets?
What are you giving away?
Linda, what's our prize? So there are 3 raffle prizes this evening. The first of them is a Pelican waterfall faucet. The second one is a $50 Visa gift card, and the third one is a $25 Regal Cinemas gift card. So, last call on raffle tickets. Is everything in there? Okay.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I don't, like I said, there was things I picked up on as a kid. But when you can actually look into it, and then I remember I was trying to my child class. To finish the
Hey everybody, our first ticket is 024811.
I get it.
Absolutely. That's it. No more Brazilian. No more. You want to trade my birthday for that?
What did you win?
Our next winner of the Regal Cinemas gift card, 249827. There you go. Hey. Tell them everything else. Thank you.
Toys for Tots.
And last for the $50 gift card is 024837.
Doug King.
There you go.